This next one should be quick. We're going to talk about cognition and language real quick. So, as you guys have come to be familiar with, there are a variety of different ways that a patient's cognitive function and communication function can be impacted whenever there is damage to our brain. And it has a huge impact on someone's ability to participate, interact, improve, all of that. And there's a lot of different things that we look at when we think of cognition. Everything from just simple arousal levels. Is someone alert? Are they obtunded? Are they in a stupor? Are they comatose? But kind of the more kind of specific things that we actively test for, we'll usually start with things like attention and concentration. So this one's a huge one. Can they attend to the task that we're doing? How distractible are they? Can they split their attention one way versus the other? Can they do two things at once? Dual task has motor components to it, but we're really pulling when we're doing dual tasks with our patients on their ability to divide their attention. It can be very difficult to do. There are four main types of attention that are that we kind of observe for and can even test for that have functional relevance to folks and their functionality after any kind of brain injury, stroke, you name it. There's sustained attention. How long can they hold their attention? Selective, can you focus on what's important? Selective attention, there's this common test called the Stroop test. That's this guy down here. And this one's actually kind of tough. You can give it a shot, see how you do. So you time the patient. And the Stroop test, what you do is you go through each one of these words, and they're all colors, but instead of saying blue, you have to say the color that the word is written in. So it would go green, purple, yellow, red, et cetera, et cetera. It's actually harder than it looks. So that's a way, and so you are selectively picking out what you were told to select out. That's the Stroop test. I skipped over this. This is the cancellation test. So actually the cancellation test can be used for a lot of different things. One way we will do is sustain. So this is a bunch of pictures. So let's see what we got for pictures. There's a bird. I would have the patient cross out all of the birds and until they are done, can they hold on to that task without getting distracted? Divided attention is dual task. Obviously a very functionally relevant one. We spend a lot of time on it in neuro. There's no official way to test for divided. The easiest kind of brute way to do it is do a walkie-talkie test. How does a patient walk when they're not talking? How does a patient walk when they are talking? I personally cannot chew gum and walk at the same time, and I will lose my balance. So I would not do well on a walkie-talkie test for sure. Alternating attention is just moving back and forth from one to another. So a kind of more day-to-day example of alternating attention is when you're cooking. If you're following a recipe, turning to the recipe, reading the recipe, and then turning back and applying it would be an example of alternating. Memory is huge. Memory is huge because we need the patients to have carryover, and we need them to be able to recall what they are learning and apply it each day in each session. 3 different ways we look at memory. There's immediate recall. We'll test it by asking someone to repeat 3 or 4 words right after you say them. Short-term memory is minutes to hours. So what did you do in OT this morning? We're in PT this afternoon. Can you remember what you did in OT? Short-term memory is really important for learning new material in the acute phase and really important for general day-to-day carryover. Long-term memory doesn't have quite as much of a functional effect, but still can get in the way sometimes. Long-term memory is kind of our months to years. So where was your birthday last month? What class did you take last year? Those kind of things. When is your birthday? What did your mom do for her birthday last year? You name it. So that's more long-term, a little bit less functionally relevant, but we keep an eye on it anyways. Long-term memory tends to be spared more often than short-term and immediate. Executive function is another huge one, a little bit more obtuse. So executive function, we will see impairments in executive function when folks have frontal lobe involvement, whether it's a frontal lobe disorder or just a frontal lobe lesion. You will see oftentimes impairments to our executive function, especially when our prefrontal cortex is involved a little bit lower and up front. There's a lot of different things that go into our executive function. So our executive function is kind of our ability to act appropriately in each scenario as we go throughout our day and go throughout our experiences. We pull from memory, from cognitive flexibility to be able to change the way that we see, act, and do. and as well as our ability to inhibit certain behaviors or actions. Those kind of are the three big things that come into our ability to overall demonstrate appropriate executive activity. And all kind of the different things that go into executive function are listed for you right there, all very important. When a patient lacks executive function, they can often be argumentative, distractible, they don't want to do what you want them to do, inappropriate, crass, those kind of things, which certainly can make sessions and participation more complicated. Language. So we've touched on language with TBI. We talked about language with Molly in our case study. Two main things that we talk about with language. There's dysarthria, which is kind of, it's independent on the accuracy of language, but it's hard to understand someone. So if someone is dysarthric, their speech is very slurred. Be very, very difficult, even though they're technically saying what they should be saying. Sometimes it's just as limiting as an aphasia. And aphasia is an actual impairment of the language itself. There's a lot of different types of aphasia. We're going to get there in a second, which can either impact the production or the comprehension of our speech, or both. And then could also impact our ability to read and write. So those are kind of the two main differences between the two kind of main things we think of when we think of language. And when we think about aphasia, where we spend a lot of our times, the two main guys are Broca's and Wernicke's. So our Broca's region is located in our frontal lobe, usually on the left side of our brain for the vast majority of us. Our language centers are on the left. Broca's, the kind of unofficial term that Broca's get is a Broca's burger. And then Wernicke's is a Wernicke's salad. You always got to bring it back to food. That is the way that I like to operate. So Broca's burger. So Broca's aphasia is a breakdown of speech production. So their comprehension very well is usually fine, and they know that something's wrong. That's an important distinguishing factor, but their speech is very fragmented, effortful, and incorrect. They will often perseverate on specific words. They will be able to pull nouns much more easily than everything else. Their sentences or phrases will only be 1 to 2 to 3 words at a time, and they get stuck quite frequently. The reason why we call it a Broca's burger is a burger is very segmental. You've got the bun, which is very different from the lettuce, which is very different from the onion, which is very different from the cheese. So every kind of bit is a little bit segmented in a burger, whereas a Wernicke's salad, on the other hand, a salad, everything's kind of tossed in. It's all over the place, tossed. It has its own no rhyme or reason to when you're going to find a crouton or when you're going to find a tomato. Wernicke's is what we call fluent aphasia. Broca's is non-fluent. Wernicke's, someone who has Wernicke's aphasia just makes no sense. They are all over the place. They will have a mixed up combination of words. They will say totally made up words, totally inaccurate words. They make no sense. They're very fluid. They can talk till they lose their voice. They have prosody, which is kind of the, that's the best way to explain. Prosody is kind of the emotion behind your speaking. People with Broca's tend to be kind of much more flat in their intonation. But by and large, Wernicke's is meaningless with what they're saying. And the hardest part about Wernicke's is they do not realize that they don't make sense. So that's really difficult because both patients will get frustrated. Broca's gets frustrated because they know that they're not making any sense and they just want to get their words out. Wernicke's gets frustrated because every time they're telling you something that's important or a story, everyone's looking at you like you have 10 heads because they don't understand you. So both of these language deficits really can bring on frustrations for these patients. You can also have global aphasia, which is actually usually, unfortunately, what you see more likely than not, where you have kind of either a combination of both, but most importantly, you have both a breakdown in speech production and then comprehension as well. Global aphasia is extraordinarily debilitating and difficult to work with, and unfortunately pretty common. Surprise, though, there are actually, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 different types of aphasia. We are not going to spend our time on them. Aphasia is such an in-depth thing. It's gonna be a whole lecture in Neuro 1 from now on, but so that you guys can have the resources that I pulled from. So the National Aphasia Association is a fantastic source and website. They have really user-friendly diagnoses of all of these guys. I put the link right there on the bottom of the slide. in case you're curious. So really what's going to be important for language is just kind of getting a basic idea on the best ways that this patient understands, the best way that this patient's able to communicate, using your speech therapist, using your occupational therapist as supports for these patients is going to be huge, so that you can figure out the best way to help manage this patient's rehabilitation and functional progress without this language deficit getting too much in the way, which is easier said than done. Okay, we're going to pause here and then we'll actually start talking about what happens when certain arteries are injured. See you then.